All right, let's talk about the economy. It's this huge, complicated thing that affects every part of our lives. Today, we're diving into macroeconomics to give you a toolkit, a way to understand the big picture forces that are constantly shaping our world. You see headlines like these every single day, right? They're constantly being thrown at us. Stocks are up, inflation is down, a recession might be coming. It all sounds really important. But let's be honest, it can also be incredibly confusing. What does it all actually mean? So, how do we cut through all that noise? How do we go from just hearing these terms to actually understanding what's driving them? Well, there's a whole field of study designed to answer exactly that question. And that's where macroeconomics comes in. It's the method we use to solve the mysteries of the economy. It's all about stepping back from our own personal finances to see the giant, interconnected machine that we're all a part of. You see, macroeconomics tackles the really big questions. Stuff like, why do some countries get richer over time while others don't? Why do prices suddenly shoot up? And why are there times when lots of people are out of work? These are the questions that define everything from government policy to business decisions. Okay, so if you want to understand the health of something as massive as an entire economy, where do you even start? Well, think about it like a doctor checking a patient's vital signs. Economists do the same thing, and they focus on three key pieces of data. First up is real gross domestic product, which everyone just calls GDP. The easiest way to think about this is as the entire country's total paycheck. It's the sum of everybody's income. And that word real is super important. It means the number is adjusted for inflation, so we can see if we're actually better off or if things just cost more. Next, we have the inflation rate. This one's pretty simple. It tells us how fast the average price of everything is going up. When inflation is high, the money in your pocket just doesn't buy as much as it used to. And the opposite, when prices are falling, is called deflation. And trust me, that brings its own whole set of problems. And our third vital sign is the unemployment rate. This tells us what percentage of people who are able and willing to work just can't find a job. It's probably the most direct measure we have of how well the economy is creating opportunities for people. Okay, so we've got our vital signs, GDP, inflation, and unemployment. But just knowing the numbers isn't enough. How do economists figure out how these things are all connected? I mean, they can't just run a giant experiment on the real economy. So what do? They build models. I love this quote from Albert Einstein because it's the perfect way to think about economic models. They're not some kind of weird, complicated magic. They're really just a way of taking our basic intuitions about how the world works and making them more precise and logical. Think of an economic model like a map. A map isn't the actual city, right? It leaves out all the details like trees and mailboxes so you can focus on what's important, the streets. Models are just like that. They're simplified toy economies that strip away the noise so we can see the fundamental relationships between things. So, here's the basic recipe for how a model works. You start with your inputs. These are called exogenous variables. Think of them as things that happen outside the model, like a big technological breakthrough or a war. The model itself is the process, the set of rules showing how everything is connected. And what you get at the end are the outputs, the endogenous variables. These are the things the model is trying to explain, like what happens to inflation. Let's make this real with maybe the most famous model in all of economics, supply and demand. And let's use something we all love, pizza. The demand curve slopes down. Pretty simple. The cheaper the pizza, the more we want. The supply curve slopes up. The more a shop can charge, the more pizza they want to make. And where those two lines cross, that's the sweet spot. That's the equilibrium, where the market naturally settles on a price and a quantity. Now here's where the model gets really cool. It lets us play what if. So look at that first graph. What if everyone in town gets a raise? That's our outside shock. Suddenly, more people can afford pizza, so the whole demand curve shifts to the right. And our model predicts the result, a new equilibrium with a higher price and more pizza sold. Now, look at the second graph. What if the price of cheese skyrockets? Well, that makes pizza more expensive to produce, shifting the supply curve to the left. The model's prediction? The price goes up, but this time, fewer pizzas get sold. See how that works? Now, this next idea is absolutely crucial. A huge assumption in any model is about how fast prices change. Some models assume prices are flexible, that they adjust instantly, like we just saw with the pizza. And that's a pretty good way to think about the economy over the long run. But in the real world, a lot of prices are sticky. Think about it. The price of a haircut or your monthly rent doesn't change every single day. Models that use sticky prices are way better at explaining things in the short run, like why we have recessions. Okay, enough with the theory. Let's put these tools to work. We can actually use our three vital signs, GDP, inflation, and unemployment, to tell the story of the US economy over the past 100 years or so. We can see those long-run trends and those short-run shocks in the real data. So first, let's look at real GDP per person. The big story here is impossible to miss. That powerful, steady upward climb. It's a story of incredible long-term growth. But look closer. It's not a smooth ride, is it? It's punctuated by these sharp, painful drops. Those are recessions. And that massive cliff right there, that's the Great Depression. Now, check out inflation. This chart is a total roller coaster. For decades, it was all over the place, with periods of falling prices, that deflation we talked about, popping up all the time. Then you get to that huge mountain in the 1970s. That was a period of really high, painful inflation, a classic supply shock, just like when the price of cheese went up in our pizza model. That relatively calm period at the very end, that's actually pretty unusual, historically speaking. And finally, let's look at unemployment. Now, there's no real long-term trend here, but look at those swings. You just can't miss that terrifying spike during the Great Depression, when almost a quarter of the entire workforce was out of a job. And you see all those other, smaller peaks? Every single one of them corresponds to a recession, a stark reminder of the real human cost of these economic cycles. So, we've looked at the vital signs, we've looked at the models, we've looked at the history, but why does this actually matter to you? Because understanding this stuff is what takes you from being a passenger to being an informed citizen. In the end, macroeconomics isn't a crystal ball. It can't tell you for sure what the stock market will do tomorrow, but that's not its purpose. Its real power is that it gives us a framework, a set of tools, to think more clearly and logically about the massive forces that are constantly shaping our lives and our society. So the next time you see one of those confusing headlines, it doesn't have to be just noise. You now have the toolkit to start breaking it down. You know the vital signs to look for, you know the kinds of questions to ask, and you have a way to think about the answers. So the question isn't, what does it all mean anymore? The real question is, now that you have the tools, what do you see?